Hello developers and welcome to PHP Developers TV, your home for everything you need to know to be a knowledgeable PHP developer. I'm your host, Scott Keck-Warren. As developers, we spend a lot of time testing our code that we've just written. Generally, this is a manual process where we write a little code and then type in some inputs to verify that we get what we expected. The downside of this process is that it's very time consuming to manually enter a bunch of input to see if one of them now fails after we've made a change. What if we could use an automated testing tool to do the hard work for us? That's where PHPUnit comes into the picture. What is PHPUnit? PHPUnit is a unit testing framework written in PHP that uses PHP test code to test PHP application code. The concept of unit testing isn't something we've discussed before, so let's review that very briefly. Wikipedia defines unit testing as a software testing method by which individual units of source code are tested to determine whether they are fit to use. Ideally, a unit test is small and can be run quickly. There are exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, the focus is on speed and how to just test a single class. We can use PHPUnit to write integration tests. Integration tests are used to test how multiple classes interact with each other. These tend to be slower to set up and slower to run. Ideally, our tests won't interact with anything external to our application, such as external APIs, services, and databases. Sometimes we can't get around this limitation. For example, we might have a reporting module where its primary function is to get data from a database, and we need to verify that it can do this properly. There are many other testing frameworks for testing PHP code, but PHPUnit is the de facto testing framework for PHP. Some other testing frameworks to look into include Codeception, Behat, and PHPSpec. Installing PHPUnit. There are several ways to install PHPUnit. Several of them appear to be around from the days before Composer existed, but unless there's a very specific reason that you need one of these other versions, we recommend that PHPUnit be installed using Composer. There is a great internet debate over if PHPUnit should be installed globally or in every project. The argument to installing it globally is that instead of having to specify the full path to PHPUnit in our project, we can save ourselves a little time by having it in our path and just typing the name. This works great if we only have one project in our system, or all of our projects are using exactly the same major version of PHPUnit. People who are working with multiple projects at different versions of PHPUnit are going to want to install it per project. Running PHPUnit. PHPUnit is a command line tool, and as a command line tool, there are lots of parameters that make it super powerful. This power allows us to run just some of our tests depending on how we call PHPUnit. Here are some of the ones we use most often. We can run PHPUnit without any parameters and it will run all of our tests. This is how we'll run it before we deploy our changes to production. We can pass the path of a specific test file we want to run and it will run just the tests inside that file. This is helpful if we want to make sure our changes to a file didn't affect any other functionality in that class. We can use the filter parameter to run tests that contain specific words. This is helpful if we want to isolate our run of PHPUnit to just a few tests. For example, we may have changed our user class and we want to run any tests that have user in the name of the test class or the test method. Finally, we can filter it so we can run a specific test in a specific file. This is a good way to run just the test we're working on to speed us up and not get distracted by other tests failing. When we're developing a new test, we start out by running just the new test using the filter file option. Once that's working the way we want it to, we'll run the whole file to make sure we didn't break a related test. Finally, we'll run all the tests to make sure we didn't affect any classes that may have a dependency on the class that we changed. While PHPUnit is a command line tool, there are some huge efficiency gains from looking into how our IDE can call PHPUnit directly. Without IDE integration, when we're running our tests, we have to make some changes to our code, tab over to our terminal, type in the command that we want, and then we can see the results of our change. With IDE integration, there is generally a button we can use to run a single test or a whole file, or better yet, there's a keyboard shortcut. Organization. We love how PHPUnit organizes its tests. All test files are inside of a test folder separate from our application logic. PHPUnit uses PHP classes to group similar tests together. We almost always want a test class for each application class that contains logic. We generally don't want to write tests for models that have no logic or are only there so we can use our framework's ORM or that are being used to house constants. We also recommend a test class for common initial conditions. For example, we have a series of tests for each role a user might have in our application. By grouping them into a class by role, we can quickly know where to go if we need to make a change to how one of the roles act. These test classes also have a shared superclass that has common tests. This can be super beneficial when we add another user role. PHPUnit.xml. The only other thing we're going to need to get started using PHPUnit is a PHPUnit.xml file in the root of our project. This file will be loaded automatically by PHPUnit when it loads if it's in the directory where we're calling PHPUnit from. Writing our first test. PHPUnit organizes tests inside PHP classes. We can name our test classes any way we want as long as it's a valid PHP class name. Each class also needs to end with test, or PHP won't auto-load that file by default. This can be changed by altering a setting in the PHPUnit.xml file. The class also needs to extend PHPUnit framework test class. Now that we've created our test class, we can start adding some tests. In PHPUnit, individual tests are just class methods. There are two ways to do this. The first is to name our test starting with the word test. The second is to use the @test annotation in the doc block for the method. Which one you choose is a personal or team preference. We learned PHPUnit before the annotation option even existed, so we default to prefixing tests with test. It also uses less vertical space, which can be helpful when we're designing the slides for these presentations. Each test must call at least one assertion method. Assertion methods are used to assert that a value from our code matches an expected value. PHPUnit ships with a lot of assertions, and it seems like every release contains more. Assertion methods start with the word assert and then detail what it's asserting. If the value we're sending the assertion doesn't match the expected value, the test is going to be marked failed the next time we run PHPUnit. Then we'll get a nice listing of all the failed tests in the output, creating your own test case. One of the best pieces of advice we can give about how to best structure test code is to create a test case class for each application. This will allow us to create helper functions that perform common setup and create our own set of assertions. What you will need to know to nail a job interview. PHPUnit is a testing framework for PHP. Tests are put into the test directory of your project. Tests are organized by having one test file per model. Don't be afraid to create test files with common conditions. Each test must contain at least one assertion method call. In our next video, we will walk through developing a new feature using PHPUnit, so make sure you subscribe to see it in your feed. Thank you for watching our video. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment as it helps others find our videos and gives us a nice warm, fuzzy feeling. Are you already using PHPUnit? How's it going? Let us know in the comments if it's going great, if you're tearing your hair out trying to get it to work. Until next time, this is Scott Keck-Warren for PHP Developers TV.